Hi, everyone. It was a big week in U.S. politics. In this Inside the Americas, we are focusing on Donald Trump's major win in Iowa and what that means for the future of this year's presidential election. I'm Jeannie Godula. First up, our number of the week, 51. Donald Trump won the Iowa caucuses this week with a record-breaking 51% of the vote. Trump came out in front by 30 percentage points. His two main rivals, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, a distant second and third place behind him. That first-in-the-nation election puts the former president on track to lock in the Republican nomination for the 2024 presidential campaign. Here's more from Trump's Iowa victory speech.
What a turnout, what a crowd. And I really think this is time now for everybody, our country, to come together. We want to come together, whether it's Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative. It would be so nice if we could come together and straighten out the world and straighten out the problems and straighten out all of the death and destruction that we're witnessing. That's practically never been like this. It's just so important. And I want to make that a very big part of our message. We're going to come together. It's going to happen soon, too.
James Andre joins me on the set now to break this all down for us. James, how big a win was this 51% for Trump?
Well, it is a landslide win, and basically it was expected that he was going to win for sure. Now, it was interesting because a lot of pundits were saying, right, will he make the 50% or will he not? That was the first question. Then his own aides actually said, look, we're aiming for a 13-point victory. That would be great. Well, he's actually managed to hit those two marks. So yes, over 50%. Now, it's interesting to understand exactly where those figures come from. Now, what they do show for a starter is that the anti-Trump front has not worked out, at least not in Iowa. And that means that all the legal problems that he's facing, the multiple criminal charges, well, for now, are not having any effect on what the Republicans, or at least his fan base, are still very much behind him. Now, obviously, this is Iowa, so you have to also understand that what we have here is 120,000 die-hard Republicans who have braved the cold to come out and vote out of 720,000 registered Republican voters in Iowa. Now, that is not a massive turnout. It was more in 2016, which is the last meaningful one when it comes to the Republicans. There were 186. The weather was better. But at least in that demographic, which is very conservative, die-hard Republicans, well, it does appear that Mr. Trump commands a very, very large lead.
All right, Trump, of course, ahead of Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. Now, Ron DeSantis bet the farm on Iowa, but in some ways he actually lost it. The Florida governor now risks major funding problems after pouring much of his campaign's time and resources into Iowa. He was the only candidate to visit all 99 counties in the state. But despite the fact that DeSantis didn't deliver the breakthrough performance he was hoping for, he still came in 3 points ahead of former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley.
They threw everything but the kitchen sink at me during this process. They've spent almost $50 million against me. That's more than has been spent against Biden and Trump combined. The media nonstop, and all they were trying to do is knock me out. Nikki Haley said only the top two from Iowa, go on to be viable. Well, guess what? We punched our ticket out of Iowa yesterday.
James, what are your thoughts on Ron DeSantis? Was this a huge loss for him or a bit of a win?
It was a bit of a win, actually, simply because Ron DeSantis was given third in all the polls just before the election. I mean, it was pretty close anyway. You could expect a surprise. Now, so yes, he came in second. Now, that was to be expected. And of course, this second place is all important right now because obviously what everybody is watching right now is who will be the runner-up, because that person could very well become the candidate if indeed, the lawsuits against Donald Trump indeed materialize and make him convicted so he can't run, or else if his health also fails. He is a very old man. But in any case, yes, this second place is all important. Now, Ron DeSantis, and you said it, put everything in there. He spent $20 million on ads. He toured the whole state. He went to cafes, he went to villages, he gave it everything he had. And of course, the demographic is very much in his favor. There's a lot of very religious conservatives in the northwestern part of Iowa, and he was always going to, be successful with that demographic, though they overwhelmingly chose Trump. But it's going to be more difficult for him in New Hampshire. And so what did happen, though, is he didn't fall out of the race. So he's still there. He's still very much a contender. He's number 2, pretty close to Nikki Haley. But if you take Vivek Ramaswamy, well, his campaign stopped in Iowa. He only did about 7%. And that was the end of that. So it's down to 3 now.
DeSantis, as you said, like Haley and Trump, are now focusing on the next big primary in the race, which, of course, is in New Hampshire. That's next Tuesday. Now, that state's electorate is less religiously conservative. It's less rural than in Iowa, factors that did help Trump in the caucuses. But if DeSantis and Haley can't capitalize on those differences, they may be out of the race, too.
Nikki Haley hot-footing it to New Hampshire, where she has a lot to prove. She's counting on her appeal to more moderate Republicans to slow Donald Trump's momentum after his commanding victory in Iowa.
Chaos follows him. We can't have a country in disarray and a world on fire and go through 4 more years of chaos. We won't survive it. So we need you to not just get out. We need you to get your family out. We need you to get your friends out, because we could do this.
Haley's bid for the Republican presidential nomination is riding on the January 23rd New Hampshire primary. The state is less conservative and rural than Iowa, factors that work in Haley's favour, as does New Hampshire's primary electoral system, because it allows voters who are not registered with any party to cast a ballot in the Republican race. Haley's pragmatism and willingness to compromise appears to be winning these voters over. Polls also show the former US ambassador to the UN faring better than Trump in a hypothetical race against Joe Biden.
I voted for Trump previously, and I chose this time to not vote in someone who might bring in discord to our country again.
Haley has managed to narrow Trump's lead in New Hampshire polls over the last few months. A recent CNN poll showed her just 7 points behind. She needs to finish a close second in the state to stay in the national race. Campaigning in New Hampshire the same day, Trump went after her.
I do want to talk about Nikki because this perception that she's gone up. But I worked with her for a long time, and she was okay, not great. Nikki Haley is a disaster.
And the staunchly Trumpian Republican base appears to agree.
We need this momentum. He gets Iowa and New Hampshire. I don't know a whole lot about politics, but you get the first 2. It's momentum. And just like sports and sales, momentum's where it's at.
After her third-place finish in Iowa's caucus, Haley has an uphill battle, as does Ron DeSantis. After a disappointing result in Iowa, the Trump-style conservative has even less chance in New Hampshire. The most recent Reuters Ipsos poll shows that nationally, Trump holds a 37-point lead.
James, let's talk a bit more about Nikki Haley now. How do her chances look at the moment?
Actually, they look pretty good in New Hampshire, simply because New Hampshire is a very different ballpark than Iowa is. First, it is a semi-open primary, which means that registered Democrats will vote for Democrat candidates, but that's another story. Republican registered voters will vote in the Republican race, but then people who are not registered can also vote. So that obviously opens the field. So a lot of people who are not registered voters are definitely going to go and cast their ballot. Now, Nikki Haley is less conservative than Donald Trump is. She's not on this MAGA line. She's favored by the business community also, and she's basically in New Hampshire coming in second with a much smaller gap in the polls. What we're talking about here is basically most polls at this stage are saying 41 for Trump, 30 for Haley, 7 for DeSantis, who indeed with this more open primary and less conservative voter base has less chances here in New Hampshire. Now, yes, she could very well close that gap. If she does, that would show that the less Trump fan hardcore Republican base are indeed interested in an alternative to Trump. And that would mean her campaign can carry on. It's more difficult for Ron DeSantis, but what's happening right now is that Donald Trump has turned to her. He's now attacking her very directly, and his narrative is basically that he is what they call a rhino, a Republican in name only, and that is what he's going to try and peddle in this last leg of the campaign for New Hampshire.
So despite that possible good news for Nikki Haley, America is still looking now at what could be a Trump-Biden rematch this November, something that the current president, of course, is focusing on as well. The presumptive Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, reacted to Trump's win on X, formerly Twitter. He writes, here's the thing. The election was always going to be you and me, the public, versus extreme MAGA Republicans. James, just a quick word on Joe Biden before you go. Would a Trump-Biden rematch be actually a good thing for him?
Well, if you take the polls, it does appear it would be the best option. Nikki Haley, for example, would be the worst option. I mean, she's 51. She was an ambassador under Donald Trump to the UN. She's a former South Carolina governor. And, well, her popularity seems to be soaring, but she's also probably more credible as a president to a large part of the more moderate electorate than Trump now is after what he did during his first term and, of course, all the controversies and these criminal charges he's facing. So, yes, she's dangerous. And some, once again, this is at this stage, it's very early. The election is in November. But a lot of the polls are saying now, if you take an average, that faced with Nikki Haley, well, Nikki Haley would win 53 to 48 to Joe Biden in the general election. Now, those figures are, for example, less clear when it comes to Donald Trump. The margin of Trump's victory, because that's where we stand right now, would be smaller. Once again, we're months before the election. Anything could happen. But yes, of course, a rematch is probably the best option for Joe Biden, because everybody knows now Donald Trump, what he's capable of. And Joe Biden is obviously building his whole campaign about not being Donald Trump.
All right, James, thank you so much for that, and glad to have you on hand to keep an eye on that for us as we come up to that election in November. James Andre, thank you so much. Thanks to you for watching this U.S. election special. Inside the Americas, we'll be back again next week with all the news from north to south.